Hubby left a note, goodbye. Never loved you anyway and stole my money, but he walked into a trap. Goodbye. Never loved you anyway. That was the last thing my husband left me, a cruel note on the fridge. But the real shock? Moments later, my phone exploded with fraud alerts. My bank accounts were being drained, my identity stolen, and my marriage a complete lie. But what he didn't know was that he had just walked into the biggest mistake of his life. Because while he thought he was playing me, I had already set the perfect trap. Want to see how I turned the tables and took everything from him? Keep watching, this is a revenge story. You won't believe! The morning started like any other coffee brewing. The hum of the news in the background. A quiet moment before the day truly began. But that peace shattered the second I glanced at my phone. My bank app flashed red, an alert blinking at me like a siren. Overdrawn. Insufficient funds. Fraud alert. My stomach twisted as I stared at the numbers. That didn't make sense. I had checked our accounts just 2 days ago. Everything was fine. Or at least, I thought it was. My heart pounded as realization set in. I wasn't the one who emptied those accounts. Brandon was. The next thing I noticed was the eerie silence of the house. No morning shuffling, no sound of the shower, no scent of his cologne lingering in the air. I turned toward the kitchen, and that's when I saw it, a simple, folded note on the fridge, written in Brandon's familiar scrawl. Goodbye. Never loved you anyway. My breath caught in my throat. My vision blurred, not from tears but from rage. I should have seen this coming. No, I did see this coming. The signs had been there for months, and yet, standing in my own kitchen, reading those 5 cold words, I still felt the gut punch of betrayal. Brandon was gone. But he didn't just leave, he vanished, and he had taken everything with him. The phone rang, breaking through the suffocating silence. Brandon's sister. I picked up, forcing my voice to stay steady. Hey, Kelly. What's up? You tell me. Where's Brandon? He was supposed to send me the rent money last night. It's not in my account. Her voice was tight, frustrated, but I barely heard her. Rent money? He had been sending her money? I felt my grip on the phone tighten. Of course, he had. Kelly had always defended Brandon, always took his side no matter what. Now she was realizing what I had known for weeks. Brandon was a liar, a fraud. And now, he was gone. He promised you rent money? I asked, feigning surprise. Are you saying he took money from our account? Yes. He told me he had it covered, but now I can't reach him. I thought maybe I have to go. I hung up before she could say another word. My hands were already shaking, but not from fear. From fury. Brandon thought he had played me. He thought he was in control. He thought he had drained everything and walked away clean. But he had no idea who he was dealing with. See, Brandon wasn't just running from me. He was running from something much bigger. And what he didn't realize was that every move he had made, every cent he thought he had hidden, every secret he had tried to bury, I had already uncovered. He had spent months planning his escape, but what he didn't know was that I had spent months setting a trap. Brandon wasn't just a cheating husband. He was a career conman. And, unfortunately for him, he had married a forensic accountant. I grabbed my laptop, flipping it open to the folder I had labeled just in case. Inside were months of financial tracking, flagged transactions, hidden credit cards, money wired under different aliases. I had documented everything. I had prepared for this. I knew he was planning to run. I just didn't know when. But now I had him exactly where I wanted him. My phone buzzed again. Another fraud alert. Another failed withdrawal attempt. Brandon was out there, somewhere, desperately trying to access the money he thought he had stolen. I could almost hear the panic setting in. The realization that every account was frozen. That every escape plan he had meticulously crafted was falling apart in real time. He thought he had won. He thought he was untouchable. But he forgot one crucial thing. When you steal from a forensic accountant, you don't just lose the money. You lose everything. I picked up my phone. scrolling through my contacts until I landed on a number I had saved for weeks. FBI Financial Crimes Division. It was time to make the call. I took a deep breath and steadied my hands before dialing the number. The FBI's Financial Crimes Division wasn't new to me. I had worked with them on cases before. But this time, the case wasn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. This time, it was personal. As the line rang, I stared at the folder on my screen, the one I had been building for months. Every bank transfer, every offshore account, every transaction Brandon had tried to hide. He had no idea that the woman he thought he was conning had been tracking him every step of the way. Agent Morrison speaking, a firm voice answered. Agent Morrison, this is Isla Thompson. I believe I have a case of financial fraud that needs immediate attention, I said, my voice steady, controlled, the way it had been trained to be. But inside, my blood was boiling. And the suspect is my husband. There was a pause, then go on, and so I did. I laid out everything, the flagged transactions, the secret accounts, the offshore wire transfers under fake business names, how he had been withdrawing small amounts over time, thinking he was being careful, how he had opened a credit line in my name without my knowledge, how he had been feeding money into accounts I hadn't even known existed until I started digging. Brandon had built an elaborate web, believing no one was watching, but I had been watching. When I was done, there was silence on the other end. Then Morrison spoke, his tone shifting from professional to intrigued. You're saying you have documented evidence of his financial movements before he even made the final move? That you've tracked his activity across multiple accounts? Yes, I said simply. You do realize how rare that is? He asked. Most victims only realize what's happened after their accounts are drained. You're telling me you caught him in the act before he could even disappear? I told you, I said, a small, humorless smile playing on my lips. He married a forensic accountant. There was another pause. We need you to come in. If what you're saying checks out, we may be dealing with something much bigger than just marital fraud. Bigger. That word sent a chill down my spine, because I had already begun to suspect it. The patterns, the aliases, the meticulous planning. Brandon wasn't just running from me. He was running from something much bigger. As I hung up, another notification popped up on my phone. A new transaction attempt declined. I could almost picture him, wherever he was, sitting in some dingy motel room or rented car, his phone in his hand, trying desperately to move money that was already gone. He thought he was ahead of me. He thought I was clueless. But now, he was the one running out of time. I grabbed my keys and my evidence folder and headed to the FBI field office in downtown Milwaukee. The drive was a blur, my mind racing through every scenario, every contingency plan Brandon might have had. I had prepared for him trying to drain our accounts. I had prepared for him vanishing without a trace. But what if I hadn't prepared for the full scope of what he had been involved in? By the time I arrived, Agent Morrison was already waiting for me in a glass-walled conference room. A few other agents sat around the table, laptops open, screens filled with transaction histories that I recognized instantly. They had already started running searches on Brandon's name, and what they found made my stomach drop. You were right, Morrison said, sliding a file across the table. Brandon isn't just running from you. He's been running from law enforcement for years. I opened the file and felt my breath hitch. Multiple aliases, multiple wives, multiple victims. Phoenix, Seattle, Denver. Different names, different lives, but always the same pattern. He'd find a woman, one with a strong financial position. He'd charm her, gain access to her assets, then slowly bleed her dry before disappearing. You're telling me I was just one of many? I said, my voice quiet but edged with fury. Morrison nodded grimly. And you're the only one who saw it coming. I clenched my jaw. I had spent years believing I had married a man who was, at the very least, genuine. Instead, I had married a professional con artist. But what made me different from the others? Why had I been the one to catch him? because he got greedy, because he underestimated me, because, for the first time, he tried to con someone who knew exactly how people like him operated. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled. So what now? Morrison exchanged a look with another agent. We set a trap. A slow smile spread across my face. Perfect, I said, because he just texted me. I slid my phone across the table, showing the message from Brandon. I made a mistake. Can we talk? Morrison's eyes gleamed. He's desperate, he said. That means he's getting sloppy. Good, I said, my grip tightening on the table. Because I'm just getting started. He thought he was in control, that he had everything planned down to the last dollar. But what he didn't see was the web I had been spinning behind his back. Now, the walls were closing in and he had no idea. But here's the question. How do you think I'll strike back? Will I expose him to the FBI first? Or make him watch as I erase every single penny? He tried to steal? Comment 1 if you think I'll ruin him financially first. Comment 2 if you think I'll let him walk into his own downfall before he even sees it coming. The trap was set. Brandon thought he still had control, but he had no idea he was walking straight into the lion's den. I played my part perfectly hesitant, conflicted, the scorned wife still willing to listen to his excuses. He bought it, just like he had bought every other carefully calculated move I had made. I told him I needed time to think, that I wasn't sure what to do. His response came quickly, as I knew it would. Please, Isla. Let me explain in person. I had already coordinated with the FBI. The meeting spot was a quiet cafe downtown, public enough that Brandon wouldn't suspect anything, but controlled enough that agents could move in as soon as we had what we needed. Surveillance cameras were already in place, every angle covered, every exit blocked. Brandon was about to run out of options. The morning of the meeting, I stood in front of the mirror, forcing my hands to stop shaking. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. The moment I would finally look him in the eye and watch the realization sink in that his game was over. I arrived at the cafe 10 minutes early, my heart pounding, my lawyer seated a few tables away, his presence subtle but deliberate. The FBI agents were stationed in nearby vehicles, watching every move through the hidden earpiece I wore. I took a deep breath, sipping my coffee, pretending to be just another woman waiting for a meeting. Then he walked in. For a moment, time slowed. Brandon looked exactly as he always had: tailored suit, expensive watch, confident smirk. But this time, I could see the cracks. His eyes darted around the cafe, scanning the room, his movements more rigid than usual. He was nervous. Good, he should be. He slid into the chair across from me, letting out a dramatic sigh, as if this whole thing was just a misunderstanding. God, Isla, I've missed you, he said, reaching for my hand. I pulled away before he could touch me. His smile faltered, but he recovered quickly. Look, I know you're upset, and I get it. But I swear to you, I never meant for things to go this way. I tilted my head, feigning curiosity. Really? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you meant for exactly this to happen. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. It was never about hurting you, he insisted. I just got caught up in something bigger than I could control. I made some bad investments, trusted the wrong people. I didn't know how to get out, so I panicked. That's why I left. But I swear, if you help me, we can fix this together. I almost laughed. The audacity. Even now, he was still trying to manipulate me. Still trying to play the role of the desperate, misunderstood man. I leaned forward slightly. Fix this together? I repeated, lowering my voice. Brandon, do you even hear yourself? You stole from me. You lied to me. And you're telling me this was all just a bad business decision? His jaw tightened. I didn't steal from you, Isla. I borrowed. There's a difference. I shook my head, keeping my expression neutral. No, Brandon, there isn't. I let the silence stretch, watching his discomfort grow. How much trouble are you really in? I asked finally, tilting my head. Because I have a feeling I don't even know the half of it. That was the moment he broke. I saw the flicker of something in his eyes, fear, desperation, maybe even realization that he had underestimated me for the last time. He glanced around, lowering his voice. "It's bad," he admitted. "I owe money to people you don't mess with. If I don't come up with 200 grand fast, I'm done. But we still have access to our emergency fund, right? You can withdraw it today, and then we'll figure out the rest." I forced myself to look conflicted, pretending to consider his words, pretending I didn't already know that our emergency fund had been locked down by the FBI. The moment I filed the fraud reports. "I don't know, Brandon," I said hesitantly, dragging out the pause. "That's a lot of money." "I need to be sure you're telling me the truth." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a crumpled piece of paper and sliding it across the table. "A bank account number. You can send the money directly here," he said. "Once I clear my debts, I promise, I'll come back. We can start over." I stared at the paper for a long moment before reaching for it. My fingers brushed against it, but instead of picking it up, I simply pushed it back toward him. "Why don't you keep this?" I said, my voice now ice cold. Brandon frowned. "What?" I folded my hands neatly on the table, my heart pounding as I leaned in just slightly. "I just think it's funny," I said, keeping my tone casual. "How you thought I'd actually fall for this." His face paled. "Isla," I shook my head. "No, Brandon. You don't get to talk your way out of this one. You see, I've known for months. Every time you tried to move money, every lie, every transaction, you left a trail." I nodded toward the security cameras in the cafe. "And right now, all of it is being recorded." He followed my gaze, then looked back at me, panic creeping into his expression. "You set me up," I smiled. "You did that all by yourself." A beat of silence. Then, the moment everything changed. The door to the cafe opened, and 2 FBI agents walked in. Morrison led the way, his badge flashing as he stepped toward our table. Brandon's hands curled into fists. I could see the fight or flight instinct kicking in. He was realizing, too late, that he had nowhere left to run. "Brandon Roberts?" Morrison said, his voice calm but firm. "You're under arrest for multiple counts of financial fraud, identity theft, and wire fraud." Brandon's chair scraped against the floor as he pushed back. But before he could do anything stupid, another agent grabbed his arm, twisting it behind his back as they cuffed him. He turned to me, fury in his eyes. "You think this is over?" he spat. "You think you've won?" I stood, straightening my blazer, my voice unwavering as I said the words I had waited months to say. "I don't think, Brandon. I know." As they dragged him out of the cafe, the entire weight of the last few months settled over me. It was over. The man who had thought he could play me, con me, steal from me, he had finally lost, and I had never felt stronger. The aftermath of Brandon's arrest should have given me peace, but instead it set off a storm I hadn't fully anticipated. I sat in my car outside the cafe, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I tried to steady my breath. The sight of him being hauled away in cuffs should have been satisfying, but I knew better. Brandon wasn't the type to go down quietly. I checked my phone. Dozens of missed calls, a flood of texts, all from numbers I didn't recognize. But one name stood out: Rachel Clark, the woman who had called me out of the blue, claiming she was Brandon's other wife. I hesitated before calling her back, already suspecting what she was about to tell me. "Isla," she answered immediately, her voice sharp, urgent. "You need to be careful. I just got word Brandon's people are already moving." I frowned. "His people?" she sighed. "You don't know the half of it. Brandon wasn't just some small-time scammer playing rich women for their savings. He was part of something bigger. I've been tracking him for years, and every time he disappears, he's got someone helping him on the other side. Lawyers, fake business partners, even a few dirty cops." She paused. "You might have taken down Brandon, but you just pissed off the whole network behind him." I exhaled slowly, forcing my pulse to steady. I'd been prepared for financial retaliation. Maybe even some legal maneuvering, but this was a different game. Rachel continued, "Have you checked your accounts today?" I switched my phone to my banking app, my stomach twisting into knots as the loading screen took what felt like forever. Then the numbers hit me like a punch to the gut. My accounts frozen. Every single one. My assets, my emergency funds, my investments locked down. I clenched my jaw. "How the hell they're trying to make you panic," Rachel said. "Force you into a position where you have to negotiate, maybe even drop the charges." A cold fury settled over me. They thought they could scare me? That they could back me into a corner? They clearly hadn't learned who they were messing with. I took a deep breath and steadied my voice. "All right, Rachel, tell me everything you know." She hesitated. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" I let out a humorless chuckle. "Oh, I've never been more ready in my life," she exhaled, then launched into it. Brandon didn't just target women, he used them as stepping stones. Every marriage, every scam, it was all leading to something bigger. Offshore accounts, shell companies, fake investments. He was building something massive. And now that he's in custody, the people he was working with, they're scrambling. I processed this, my mind racing through possibilities, which means they're vulnerable. "Exactly," she said. "But that also means they're dangerous. If they think you're the biggest threat to their operation, they'll do whatever it takes to make you disappear legally or otherwise." I straightened, my eyes narrowing. "Then we make sure I'm the problem they can't get rid of." Rachel hesitated. "What are you planning?" I opened my laptop, pulling up the encrypted files I had compiled over the last few months. Brandon's network had made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated me. "They want to freeze me out?" I said, a slow, calculated smile forming. "Then I'm going to burn their entire operation to the ground." By the time I arrived home, I had a plan. I called my lawyer first. "I need emergency action on my accounts. They're trying to freeze me out." He sighed. "Already saw it. I've got a judge looking at an appeal, but it's going to take time." "We don't have time," I snapped. "Brandon's not just some scam artist, he's part of something bigger. We need to make this go public." There was a beat of silence. Then, "Are you sure you want to take it that far?" I clenched my jaw. "They made this personal. I'm just returning the favor." The next call was to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Agent Morrison picked up almost immediately. "I was expecting your call," she said. "We've been tracking unusual movement in Brandon's offshore accounts. Someone is trying to move money fast." I smirked. "Good. Then we don't have to wait for them to make the first move." Within hours, I was sitting in the FBI's offices, staring at a conference table covered in documents. Bank statements, offshore wire transfers, fake business registrations. Everything Brandon's network had been working to keep hidden. "Here's what we know," Morrison said, flipping through a folder. Brandon was the face of a Ponzi scheme that spanned 5 states and at least 3 different aliases. But the real power? It's the people backing him. Hedge fund managers, real estate moguls, even a few corporate executives. They've funneled millions into fake investments. And now that their golden boy is in custody, they're trying to clean up the mess. I leaned back, exhaling. "So how do we stop them?" Morrison smiled. "Simple. We don't let them hide. We spent the next several hours connecting every single dot. Every fraudulent transaction, every shell company, every fake business deal Brandon had been a part of. We weren't just taking him down. We were taking down the entire empire that had protected him." But as we worked, my phone buzzed with a new text. "Unknown number. You have no idea what you've started. You should have just walked away." I swallowed hard, staring at the screen. The threat was clear. I turned the phone toward Morrison. She studied it, then nodded. "We were expecting this." "You think it's just a scare tactic?" I asked. Morrison's expression darkened. "Maybe. Or maybe they're planning something worse." I took a deep breath, setting the phone down. Fear was exactly what they wanted. but I had spent too long playing it safe. Now it was my turn to be the threat. I looked up at Morrison. Then let's make sure they know exactly who they're dealing with. The moment I saw the text, I knew this wasn't over. This isn't over. Simple, direct. A threat wrapped in ambiguity. But I wasn't the kind of woman who backed down. I turned the phone over in my hand, my mind already running through the possibilities. Who sent it? Someone from Brandon's network? A desperate accomplice? Or worse, was Brandon himself orchestrating something bigger from behind bars? I exhaled sharply and called Rachel. She needed to know. "Rachel," I said the moment she picked up, my voice controlled but firm. "We have a problem." By the time I arrived at the FBI's office, Morrison already had her team on high alert. "We traced the text," she said, handing me a report. "It was sent through a burner phone near the Federal Detention Center where Brandon is being held." I clenched my jaw. So, it was him. Rachel leaned over the table, scanning the report. "Wait, these timestamps don't match. If Brandon sent the message from inside, how is there another attempt on one of the offshore accounts happening right now?" Morrison's eyes darkened. "Because this goes deeper than Brandon." A second text came through on my phone. "Check your email. You're not as smart as you think." I didn't hesitate. Clicking into my inbox, I found a single email from an anonymous sender. Attached were photos of me, at work, at my apartment, through my window. A cold weight settled in my stomach. Someone had been watching me. Rachel cursed under her breath. "This isn't just about shutting down their network anymore. They're making it personal." I set my phone down, my hand steady despite the slow burn of rage crawling through my veins. I knew how to fight back in a courtroom, in a financial investigation, but now, this had just become a whole new game. Morrison's voice was sharp. "We need to move you to a secure location." I shook my head. "No, that's exactly what they want for me to hide, to be afraid. I won't play into their hands." Rachel crossed her arms. "Then what do you suggest?" I met her gaze. "We bait them." The plan was risky, but calculated just how I liked it. Brandon's people weren't just running, they were desperate, and desperate criminals made mistakes. I worked late that night, leaving the office through the main entrance like nothing had changed. If they were watching, I wanted them to believe I was vulnerable, that I was predictable. I drove home alone. At least, that's what they thought. Rachel was already inside my apartment, hidden from view. Morrison had an FBI surveillance team monitoring the area. We were waiting for them to make their move. The first hour passed in silence, then the second, and then the sound of a car door closing outside. Rachel tensed. "That's them." I moved to my desk, pretending to check emails, my heart pounding but my hands steady. I wasn't afraid. I was ready. Footsteps approached my door. A pause, then the sound of a key turning in the lock. I exhaled slowly. They had a key. Rachel moved swiftly, pressing the silent alarm button. The FBI team would be here in less than a minute. The door cracked open. A shadow moved inside. And just as the intruder stepped forward, the entire apartment lit up with flashing red and blue lights. "FBI." Hands where we can see them. The man froze, then bolted. Big mistake. The second he hit the hallway, Morrison's team tackled him to the ground. Within seconds, he was cuffed, and I finally got a good look at him. I recognized him immediately. James Foster. Brandon's former cellmate. The same man who had been laundering money through fake accounts. I stepped forward, my voice calm but sharp. "You really thought this would work?" He sneered at me, but there was fear in his eyes. "You don't know what you've done." Morrison yanked him to his feet. "Oh, we know exactly what we've done." I picked up my phone and took a slow, deliberate photo of him. "Tell Brandon this is over." The next morning, I walked into the FBI office, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Rachel smirked as I set my coffee down. "You're enjoying this a little too much." I shrugged. "What can I say? I like winning." Morrison joined us, looking pleased. We cracked Foster's phone. We now have every single one of Brandon's offshore accounts. This case just got airtight. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling. It was almost over. Brandon had spent months thinking he was the smartest one in the room. He had manipulated, stolen, and lied his way through life. But he made one crucial mistake: he underestimated me. And now, he was about to lose everything. The moment the FBI agents hauled James Foster out of my apartment, I knew the game had changed. This wasn't just about Brandon anymore. He wasn't acting alone. Someone else was out there, watching, waiting, planning, and if they were bold enough to break into my home, they were desperate. Desperation leads to mistakes. Mistakes I could use to end this once and for all. Rachel stood by the window, arms crossed, eyes scanning the street below. "They're getting sloppy," she muttered. I nodded, my mind racing. Sloppy means they're running out of time. We press harder. Morrison strode in, looking grim but satisfied. "We traced the burner phone used to send you that threat." She placed a file on the table. "It was bought 2 weeks ago in Chicago, used a fake ID. But here's the interesting part." She flipped open the folder. "There's a second account withdrawal attempt happening right now. Different state, different account, but the same pattern." I leaned over, scanning the documents. So Brandon was never working alone. Morrison shook her head. No, he had help. And based on these transactions, I'd bet everything we're dealing with someone just as dangerous, if not more. Rachel let out a slow breath. "So what do we do?" I picked up my phone, pulling up the last text I'd received. "This isn't over," I smirked. "We make them think it is. Step 1, the trap." Brandon's offshore accounts weren't just financial lifelines. They were his exit strategy. The moment those funds disappeared, his allies would panic. And when criminals panic, they make themselves visible. I sat down at my desk, pulled up my encrypted server, and began moving numbers around. Not stealing, just making it look like I was. If someone was watching his accounts, they'd think I was draining them, and that would force them to act. Less than an hour later, Morrison's phone buzzed. Movement. "They took the bait," she said, eyes locked on the incoming data stream. "Someone's trying to reroute money from Brandon's frozen account to an unknown recipient." Rachel leaned forward. "Can we trace them?" Morrison grinned. "Already did. They're in Miami." I exhaled. Finally. "So now we bring them out of the shadows." Step 2, the meeting. We needed to push them just enough to make them slip. And what better way to lure out the last player than with one final meeting? I sent the message from an anonymous account Brandon's team had used before. "Everything's falling apart. We need to talk." Midnight. Dock 14. Within minutes I got a reply. "Bring the files. Come alone." Rachel whistled. "Whoever it is, they're nervous." I smirked. "Good. Step 3. The confrontation." The Miami docks were quiet at midnight, save for the soft lapping of water against the wooden beams. A perfect place for criminals to meet. A perfect place for me to finish this. I sat on a crate, pretending to be impatient, my fingers tapping against the folder on my lap, the files they wanted so badly. Inside, nothing but blank pages. Footsteps. I didn't move. The shadow stepped closer, and then I saw them. Kelly, Brandon's so-called sister. She smirked. "Figured it out, huh?" I tilted my head. "Oh, a long time ago." She scoffed. "Then why are you here?" You think you're some kind of hero?" I held up the folder. "You want these files, right?" Her eyes flickered to the papers. "Greedy. Good. Give them to me," she demanded. I smiled. "And what do I get?" She laughed. "You get to leave with all your teeth intact." I sighed dramatically. "You know, Kelly, I've met a lot of criminals. But you're just disappointing." Her eyes darkened. "Excuse me?" I stood up, holding the folder loosely in my hands. "Brandon's in prison. Foster's arrested. The FBI has all your offshore accounts. And now you're here, desperate, trying to clean up a mess that can't be cleaned up. I smirked. You're a terrible criminal. Her jaw clenched. Shut up. Or what? I taunted. You'll do what Brandon couldn't? You think you can just waltz in here and bang? The gunshot echoed across the docks. My heart pounded. She had a gun, but she'd missed. Rachel's voice crackled through my earpiece. We've got a shot fired. Move in. Kelly took a step forward, but before she could raise her weapon again, FBI agents swarmed in from every direction. She froze, her grip tightening around the gun, her eyes darting around wildly. She was trapped. Morrison's voice rang out. Drop the weapon, Kelly. Her hand shook. For a second, I thought she might do something stupid. Then she dropped it. Agents moved in, cuffing her, and just like that, it was over. I exhaled, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders. Brandon's empire was officially dead. Step 4, the aftermath. Back at the FBI office, Morrison handed me a final report. Brandon wasn't just running small time cons. He was laundering money for an international crime syndicate. I blinked. You're telling me this was even bigger than we thought? She nodded. And you just took out one of their key players. Rachel chuckled. Not bad for a woman whose husband left her a breakup note on the fridge. I smirked. Not bad at all. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes for a moment. It was finally over. Brandon, Foster, Kelly, all of them were gone. Their operation dismantled. Their future sealed behind bars. I opened my eyes, a slow smile creeping onto my face. They thought they could outsmart me. They were wrong. The silence in the FBI office felt heavier than it should have. The chaos was over, the arrests had been made. The criminals were in custody, and yet, as I sat there staring at the case files in front of me, I realized something. Winning doesn't always feel like victory. I had spent months preparing for this, meticulously gathering evidence, setting the perfect trap, and watching as Brandon, Kelly, and their entire operation unraveled before them. And yet, even as the pieces fell into place, there was something hollow about it. Morrison sat across from me, flipping through the final reports. You did good, she said, her voice steady but softer than usual. Most people don't come out of something like this in one piece. I let out a slow breath, leaning back in my chair. Most people don't have to take down their own husband, I murmured, the words tasting strange on my tongue. Rachel walked in, 2 coffee cups in her hands. You looked like you could use this, she said, handing me one. I took it, wrapping my fingers around the warmth. Thanks. She sat down beside me, crossing her legs. So what now? She asked, stirring her coffee with a plastic stirrer. I mean, Brandon's locked up. Kelly's facing federal charges. Foster's done for. You've won. I let out a small laugh, shaking my head. Yeah, I guess I have. Morrison closed the folder in front of her and leaned forward. There's something else, isn't there? I hesitated before nodding. It's not just about them. It's about what comes next. About making sure this doesn't happen to someone else. Rachel tilted her head. Are you thinking about taking Morrison's offer? The offer. A week ago, in the middle of all the chaos, Morrison had casually mentioned that the FBI could use someone like me, a forensic accountant with real-world experience, someone who understood the minds of con artists, because she had lived with one. At first, I had dismissed the idea. I had a career, a life I had spent years building. But after everything, could I really just go back to my old job and pretend none of this had happened? I took a sip of coffee, considering it. Maybe, I admitted. I've spent my career tracking financial crimes, but this case, it was personal. It made me realize just how many people are out there running the same scam. If I can stop even one more woman from going through what I did, maybe it'll be worth it. Morrison nodded. We could start you as a consultant. You wouldn't have to give up your firm right away, but you'd be able to work cases like this. Make a real impact. Rachel nudged my arm. And you'd get to legally take down guys like Brandon for a living. That's gotta be satisfying. I smiled. It does have a nice ring to it. For the first time in months, I felt something other than exhaustion. I felt purpose. The conversation shifted, the weight of the case slowly lifting as we moved on to other things. Rachel talking about a new apartment she was considering. Morrison complaining about the bureaucratic red tape of federal law enforcement. It felt normal, safe, like I had stepped out of the storm and into the sun. But even as we laughed over coffee and case files, I knew there was still one thing left unfinished. Brandon. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Maybe it was the high ceilings, the old wooden benches, or the way the fluorescent lights flickered just enough to be unsettling. But I didn't shiver. I sat, straight-backed, my hands folded neatly in my lap as I watched them bring Brandon in. He looked smaller than before. The man who had once walked through life with arrogance, who had played people like pieces on a chessboard, now sat in an orange jumpsuit, shackles around his wrists. His face was gaunt, his hair disheveled, but the thing that struck me most was his eyes. The confidence was gone. He looked at me, and for the first time he didn't smirk. The judge read the charges, the laundry list of crimes stretching so long that at some point, even the courtroom fell into a hush. Fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, witness intimidation. The numbers were staggering: millions stolen, lives ruined, reputations destroyed, and now, finally, consequences. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, Brandon hesitated. For a second, I wondered if he'd apologize, if there'd be even an ounce of regret. But instead, he just sighed, his shoulders slumping forward. I guess I picked the wrong wife. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Even now, he thought this was about luck. The judge's voice was firm. Brandon Roberts, you are hereby sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. The gavel struck. It was over. Brandon was led out of the courtroom, and as he passed me, his gaze lingered for just a moment. He wanted to say something. I could see it in the way his mouth opened slightly, in the flicker of hesitation in his eyes. But whatever it was, he swallowed it down, and then he was gone. The next few months passed in a blur. Rachel and I started working with the FBI, helping other victims track down the money stolen from them. Some women got their savings back, others didn't. But all of them got closure. They weren't alone anymore. We made sure of that. One night, as I stood on the balcony of my new apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, my phone buzzed. A message from Morrison. Another scammer just got picked up thanks to your work. Looks like you've got a new calling, Thompson. I smiled, typing back a simple response. Good. Let's get the next one. Brandon thought he had destroyed me, but all he did was turn me into his worst nightmare. And I wasn't done yet. Brandon thought he could leave me broken, but instead, he built the strongest version of me. Not only did I take him down, but I turned his betrayal into something much bigger: justice for every woman he ever scammed. And now, he's behind bars, and I've built a career ensuring men like him never get away with it again. But here's the real question. If you had been in my shoes, would you have played it smart and legal, or gone for full-scale revenge? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications because, trust me, you won't want to miss the next story. Trust is valuable, but blind trust is dangerous. Financial fraud isn't just something that happens to corporations. It happens in marriages, friendships, and families. Always stay aware of your finances, monitor transactions, and never ignore red flags. Manipulators thrive on silence and doubt, but knowledge is power. Protect yourself by keeping records, questioning inconsistencies, and knowing when to walk away. Justice isn't just about punishing criminals, it's about reclaiming control. If something feels off, investigate. If someone tries to take advantage of you, fight back. Because in the end, the only person who should control your future is you.